My name is Emily Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I was the practical one in the family. I was the sister who followed the rules, became a teacher, stayed quiet, and chose the safe road every time. Meanwhile, my older sister Vanessa chased after money, influence, and prestige like she couldn't breathe without them. That contrast had always defined us, but nothing in our complicated history came close to what she pulled on the day of my wedding. It happened right in the middle of the ceremony. The chapel had gone still, filled with soft light pouring through the stained glass. I had just reached for Michael's hand at the altar, feeling the calm strength in his grip and seeing that steady, reassuring smile on his face. The pastor was about to speak the familiar words, "If anyone here objects," when the sound cut through the quiet, sharp heels striking stone. Then a voice that sliced the air like a blade. "This has to be a joke." Vanessa shot up from her seat, her designer dress swirling as she stood there boiling with outrage. "You're ruining your life, Emily," she yelled. "You're really marrying a waiter. A waiter, for God's sake." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I felt hundreds of eyes swing toward us all at once. My mother sank lower into her pew, clearly wishing she could disappear. Someone let out an uncomfortable cough. Michael didn't flinch. He only squeezed my hand, steady and warm, like he was grounding me in that moment. I met Vanessa's gaze and smiled, not because I was smug and not because I enjoyed the scene she was making, but because she had no idea what she'd just done. She didn't know that the man she'd publicly humiliated was actually the heir to one of the largest restaurant groups on the East Coast. She had no clue that the waiter she mocked had more inherited wealth and real work ethic than her hedge fund husband could ever imagine. And she definitely had no idea what was waiting for her at the reception. So I smiled because I knew something she didn't. The chaos she'd started would end with her sitting silent under crystal chandeliers. And the man she insulted would respond with more grace than she'd shown her entire life. Let her shout. That wasn't the real moment. The real reveal was still ahead. And it was going to change everything. Vanessa and I weren't always enemies. When we were kids growing up in a small town in New Hampshire, we shared a bedroom, whispered secrets late at night, and talked about the future like we were on the same path. Somewhere along the way, though, things changed. Maybe it started when she went off to UCLA, while I stayed closer to home before heading to Columbia. Our lives slowly pulled apart. Hers became a blur of champagne galas and weekends on yachts. Mine settled into chalkboards, lesson plans, and quiet routines. When Vanessa married Ethan, a hedge fund manager 10 years older than her, the whole Carter family treated it like royalty had joined the bloodline. I still remember my father leaning over and whispering, "She did it. She made it out." And there I was, standing in the corner with my English degree, student loans, and a teaching job that paid $3,800 a year lined up. That's when it really began. Vanessa started looking at me like I was some kind of charity case in sensible shoes. Over time, her comments grew sharper, always wrapped in polite silk. "Still driving that old Camry?" Or, "I admire how simply you live. It's very humbling." I never snapped back. Not once. I just smiled, sipped my lemon water, and steered the conversation somewhere safer. Things changed when I told her about Michael. When I met Michael Alvarez, he was managing a small Italian restaurant just outside Boston. He moved through the place like he belonged there, wiping down tables, greeting regulars by name, making sure everyone felt seen. When I spilled soda on my skirt, he quietly brought extra napkins. We ended up talking for 2 hours after my meal, and by the second date, I already knew he was the man I wanted to build a life with. Vanessa didn't see it that way. When I told her, she laughed. Not a polite laugh, but the kind that lets you know you've disappointed someone deeply. "You're dating a waiter," she said. "With your education? With our family name?" "He's more than that," I told her. "Oh, I'm sure," she said, swirling her wine. "Probably very passionate about lasagna." That was Vanessa. Everything had to be measured in money, titles, and labels. What she didn't know, and what Michael and I had agreed to keep quiet, was that he wasn't just managing a restaurant. He was that Alvarez, the only son of Antonio Alvarez, founder of the Alvarez Collective, a massive network of restaurants, boutique hotels, and private dining clubs along the East Coast. Before his father passed, Michael made him a promise. He would learn the business from the ground up. So he walked away from an executive role and started over at the bottom. No special treatment. No corner office. Just long shifts, grease-stained aprons, and real work. I want to understand every job I'll someday oversee, he told me once. The day I forget what it's like to mop the floor is the day I lose the right to lead. That was why I loved him, not just for what he believed but for how he lived it. We didn't tell anyone. Not my family. Not even my mother, who never asked questions but always looked puzzled when we showed up to places with valet parking. Michael summed it up perfectly. Let them judge, he said. It'll make the truth that much sweeter. Our wedding reflected who we were. It was small, personal, and meaningful. We chose a quiet chapel tucked into the Vermont woods, with white oak pews and gentle organ music. Nothing flashy. Nothing like Vanessa's four-tier Napa Vineyard wedding. As the day got closer, Vanessa grew more aggressive. She warned my mother, told my aunt not to waste airfare, and convinced cousins I was settling out of desperation. Still, I didn't break. Michael wasn't the risk she thought he was. He was the truth she couldn't see anymore because she'd forgotten what real authenticity looked like. She was about to remember. The morning of our wedding was crisp and calm. Early October air carried that clean, alive feeling that makes everything seem possible. The chapel looked like it belonged in a painting, surrounded by tall pines, its old stone glowing in the sunlight. Inside the bridal suite, I sat quietly while my mother adjusted my veil, her hands shaking. Not from age but from emotion. You look beautiful, she whispered, brushing a curl from my face. And ready. I smiled, feeling more grateful than words could express. The months leading up to this day had been filled with tension, quiet judgments, and forced politeness. But standing there in that moment, none of it mattered anymore. I was marrying Michael, the man who brought me tea when migraines knocked me flat, who read poetry with me on slow, rainy Sundays, and who always seemed to know when I needed words and when I needed quiet. I truly believed we had already made it through the hardest part. Then the chapel doors opened. We were halfway through the ceremony. Michael and I had just finished exchanging our vows, our hands locked together, when the pastor turned toward the guests and spoke the familiar line. If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. For a heartbeat, everything froze. And then click, click, click. The sound was unmistakable. High heels. Deliberate. Confident. Vanessa stood up with the posture of a woman stepping into a spotlight she believed was meant for her. This is insane, she declared, her voice cutting clean through the chapel. Emily, you're making a huge mistake. You're throwing your life away. The pastor went stiff. Murmurs rippled through the pews like a breeze through leaves. Michael didn't pull his hand away, but I felt his grip tighten just slightly. Vanessa stood there in a perfectly tailored navy silk dress, lipstick flawless, expression carefully controlled. This wasn't spontaneous outrage. This was practiced. You're marrying a waiter, she snapped. Have you completely lost your mind? You graduated at the top of your class. You had real options and you chose this. I met her stare without flinching. My father leaned forward from the front row. Vanessa, that's enough, he hissed. But she ignored him and stepped into the aisle, her heels echoing against the stone like a verdict being handed down. Don't come crying to me, she said sharply, when you're stuck clipping coupons in a studio apartment over a pizza place. I didn't say a word. Neither did Michael. He only looked at me with that same calm expression, his eyes twinkling with a kind of quiet amusement only I understood. Should we tell her? He mouthed. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. With an exasperated huff, Vanessa threw up her hands and spun around, storming out of the chapel like a queen forced into exile. The heavy oak doors groaned shut behind her, leaving a silence so thick I could hear every breath in the room. The pastor cleared his throat. Shall we continue? I turned to Michael, my voice steady and calm. Yes, I said. Please. What followed felt sacred. Without Vanessa in the room, the air seemed lighter. Our vows landed deeper. The applause felt warmer, more sincere. And when we walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, there was an electric energy buzzing around us. Like everyone sensed they'd just witnessed the opening scene of something much bigger. Outside, the sky had brightened. Guests tossed dried lavender and smiled with visible relief. Waiting by the chapel steps was a sleek vintage Rolls-Royce. Michael helped me inside, the leather smelling rich and worn, the engine humming softly beneath us. Nice rental, I teased. He grinned. From my personal collection. I laughed and leaned my head against his shoulder. You think she'll show up? Oh, she'll be there, he said confidently. Vanessa would never miss a chance to judge centerpieces or wrinkle her nose at the dessert table. She probably assumed we were serving cupcakes and boxed wine. I watched the Vermont countryside blur past, the fall colors burning bright like fire. She has no idea what's coming. Michael kissed my temple. She will. And with that, we drove toward the second act, where the truth, like a really good bottle of wine, had been waiting patiently to be uncorked. The Alvarez Grand Reserve sat high on a quiet bluff overlooking the water, its limestone exterior glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. In Boston, most people knew the name. Very few had ever stepped inside. This wasn't a place you booked online. Entry was by invitation only, if you were lucky. That afternoon, it was closed entirely for our wedding reception. As we pulled up, guests climbed out of the shuttles, their faces shifting from surprise to disbelief. I heard someone whisper behind us, "Wait, is this the Alvarez Grand? How did they pull that off?" Michael helped me from the car, his hand firm and reassuring at my back. His smile was the same easy one he always wore, but I knew him well enough to see the anticipation dancing in his eyes. He'd waited years for this moment, not to show off, but to finally be seen for who he really was. Not just by my family, but by anyone who ever underestimated what humility could hide. The doorman bowed and pulled open the massive glass doors. Inside, cool air carried the scent of rosemary and citrus. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, light bouncing off polished marble floors. Servers in white gloves moved silently through the room, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres plated like artwork. The shift was immediate. People slowed. Voices dropped to hushed murmurs. This wasn't just elegant, it was exclusive. Too exclusive, I could almost hear them thinking for someone like me. And certainly too exclusive for a waiter. Then Vanessa arrived. 20 minutes late, just like always. Her heels clicked confidently across the floor, until she stopped short. I watched from across the room as her eyes swept the space, confusion knitting her brow. "This must be some mistake," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "They don't host weddings here." She approached me with a strained smile. "Emily, sweetheart. What is this place? Did someone pull a few strings?" Before I could answer, a calm voice spoke behind me. "No strings," it said smoothly. "Just family." Michael stepped up beside me, relaxed and completely in control. Vanessa stared at him. "I thought you worked at Casa Bellini." "I did," he replied easily. "Still do sometimes. Great kitchen. Learned a lot there. But this is the Alvarez Grand. And I'm Alvarez." She blinked. Once. Twice. It took a few seconds to land. "Alvarez as in Alvarez Collective?" Before Michael could respond, another voice cut in. "Michael." Heads turned as an older man approached, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his cane tapping softly against the floor. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his presence alone seemed to quiet the room. "Grandfather," Michael said, smiling. Victor Alvarez wrapped him in a firm embrace, then turned to me and kissed my cheek. "So," Victor said warmly, studying me with a thoughtful smile, "this is the woman who finally convinced my grandson to come out of the kitchens." He turned his attention to Vanessa last. "And you must be the sister," he added. "I hear you made quite an impression at the church." Vanessa's face flushed deep red. I didn't know," she stammered. "Ah, yes," Victor replied calmly. "You didn't know my grandson was more than a server. That's the word you used, wasn't it?" "No," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely there. The champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed sharply, but no one rushed to help. No one even moved. Every eye in the room was fixed on her now. The people who'd witnessed her outburst earlier were watching the truth settle in, clear and undeniable. "I was only trying to protect my sister," she said weakly. "So you believed his job defined his value," Victor replied. "It's a common belief, and a shallow one." Vanessa stood frozen, mouth slightly open, words failing her for once. Then Michael surprised everyone. He stepped forward and held out his hand to her. "Stay," he said gently. Enjoy the evening. There's room for everyone here. As long as they're willing to see people for who they are, not what they do." A ripple of gasps and murmurs moved through the room. Vanessa stared at him, stunned. "After everything I said?" Michael nodded, calm and sincere. "Because of it. I didn't need to say anything." I slipped my arm through his and smiled. Vanessa hesitated, then slowly nodded, her voice barely audible. I'd like that." Victor cleared his throat. "Then perhaps we can leave the drama behind and allow these two to enjoy their first dance." As Michael led me onto the floor, the music rose around us. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Vanessa standing alone, shoulders lowered, eyes glossy, watching a reality she never expected to face. This wasn't just a revelation, it was a reckoning. And it was only the beginning. 10 months later, Michael and I were settled into a modest brownstone overlooking Boston Harbor. Despite his wealth, we chose a quiet, intentional life. I stayed in the classroom, and Michael spent his days rotating through Alvarez properties, checking in on kitchens, mentoring young staff, and meeting with vendors. It wasn't flashy. It was honest. And it was ours. Vanessa disappeared for a while. Then one rainy Thursday night at 11:40 p.m. she reappeared, standing on our doorstep in soaked designer silk, mascara streaked down her face. "They're taking everything," she whispered. "The house. The car. Ethan's under federal investigation, insider trading, fraud. I don't know what to do." Michael and I exchanged a look. The kind that didn't need explaining. I guided her inside. She perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands clenched together, eyes flicking between the floor and the fireplace, unable to meet our gaze. "I've never had to start over," she said after a long pause. "I don't know how." Michael set his laptop aside and leaned forward. "There's a small apartment above one of our restaurants in Cambridge. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, safe, and a solid place to begin." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You'd do that? After how I treated you?" "One condition," I said gently. "You work in the restaurant. Not an office. Not behind a desk. You start where Michael started. Dish pit. Tables. Prep. Closing shifts. All of it." She stared at me, stunned. "I'm not punishing you," I continued. "I'm giving you a chance, the kind you never offered anyone else." After a long silence, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try. But I don't know how to be good at anything real." "You'll learn," Michael said, standing. We all did. And so she began. The next week, Vanessa moved into the apartment with just 2 suitcases and no staff to unpack them. Silk blouses were replaced with black non-slip shoes and an apron. On her first shift, she dropped a full tray of water glasses and cried in the walk-in freezer. But she came back the next day. And the day after that. Humility can't be faked. You earn it through sweat, quiet effort, and scraped knuckles. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa was earning hers. 6 months later, I stopped by the Cambridge location just before the dinner rush. The restaurant buzzed with controlled chaos, orders flying, pans clanging, laughter echoing from the back. And there she was. Vanessa stood at the pass, hair pulled into a tight bun, sleeves rolled up. No jewelry. No gloss. Just focus. She called out orders with confidence, balanced plates like second nature, and moved with the rhythm of someone who finally understood real work. "She's earned their respect," Michael said beside me. "They trust her. They know she's not pretending." After her shift, we sat together in a quiet booth. "How would you feel about managing this place?" Michael asked casually. Vanessa froze. "Me? You trust me with that?" "You've earned it," I said. "You've shown up every single day. You never played the victim. You learned every part of this place from the ground up." Her throat tightened. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted. "But I love this job. I love earning something." Tears gathered at her lashes. "I used to think success meant being admired," she whispered. "Now I know it means being respected for who you are, not what you wear." At the next family gathering, she wore her Alvarez uniform like armor. Not to show off, but to stand tall. And this time no one laughed. She wasn't a punchline anymore. She was proof that people can change, if they're willing to work hard, humble themselves, and open their hearts. And that was the most beautiful success of all.